Nobody imagined that starting from 2011, Ethiopia would really start building the dam. Europe now has a little say in Africa, Asia, and so on. The good old days of colonialism, so to speak, are much over. Even the Americans. But now the right dam in the right places for all riparian civilizations. And the Ethiopians maybe one day will interfere with the Nile is a myth. For the sake of humanity and justice, Egypt also helped Ethiopia. Meles, the late Meles, that he was reading those volumes time and again every night secretly. They continued begging the Ethiopians, let us build a dam in Lake Tana. The dependency on the waters of the Nile is total. Egyptians and Ethiopian civilization of 1,000 years, they know or should know better what is good for them. And he asked Mubarak to read it. There is a common interest in facing Mother Nature. At least there will be water to quarrel about. Egypt needs 55.5 billion cubic water annually. Israel now produces more water than it needs. The wrong dam in the wrong place. Foreigners should not force anything. They cannot force everything. I'm still amazed how little Egyptians are aware of the concerns of Ethiopians and how little Ethiopians are aware of the concerns of the Egyptians.
Hi, I am Mahlet Ayele. I am here at the African Studies Center Library at Leiden University. For the past 2 weeks, I have been reading these books, The Cross and the River and the Nile by Professor Haggai Ehrlich. He's a very known historian and also Ethiopianist. He has done such a massive research on Ethiopia, Egypt, the Nile, Islam, Christianity in the region, both Sudan, Somalia, what have you, just such a massive research. So today I'm going to interview him via Zoom. I'm very honored and at the same time I'm very excited. It would have been so nice to interview him, to sit down with him and to talk to him with that kind of human connection. But this is what we have. So I'm very happy about for the opportunity. Our discussion for today will be the historical and cultural perspectives of Ethiopia, Egypt, and the Nile relations, and how it affects the current dispute over Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Stay tuned with me. I hope it will be very educative and informative.
Connect Africa.
Thank you, Professor Haggai Ehrlich. Thank you for your time and thank you for to have time here on our show at Connect Africa. Let me just say a little about Professor Haggai Ehrlich, MA in History of Islamic Peoples from Hebrew University, and he did his PhD in History of Ethiopia from SOAS, from the Department of African History in London. And currently he's Emeritus Full Professor of Middle Eastern and African History at Tel Aviv University. Last but not least, he has published 23 books and 61 articles. That's really vast. Thank you again and welcome.
Pleasure, Mahlet.
Let me start with this question. In the book of the Nile Histories, Cultures, and Myths, which you are one of the editors and also you appear as a writer in this book, in the conclusion, you pointed out that the historical and cultural relation between Egypt and Ethiopia have played a role in formation and reformation of their national identity, and also between the three, namely Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. Now, you also share your view that, however, in the past 2 generations, this historical and cultural relation is kind of blurred, as you say. Can we say that given what we have currently, the escalation between Ethiopia and Egypt as a result of the Ethiopia's construction of the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam for the past 10 years, they have been negotiating, still are not able to make a deal. Can we say that this escalation is a result of that historical and cultural detachment you have been talking about? And if so, how is that manifested and how can it be repaired?
Well, history is what happened in the past, and usually it's sort of fading away. But here we have more than 1,000 years of history between Egypt and Ethiopia, even though there is no common border between them. But the Red Sea on the one hand and the Nile connected the two countries very closely for 1,000 years. Now, the book that you are holding is a proceeding of a conference my friend, Professor Israel Gershoni, and I held in Tel Aviv University back, I think, in 1997. There were scholars from Ethiopia, visitors from Egypt, and all over the world, from Germany, from Holland, from what have you. And the premise of the conference, talking 1997, was that there is a myth about the possibility that Ethiopia will interfere with the waters of the Blue Nile. And all the papers are about the myth. And even some of them said it's just a myth, it will never materialize. It's a sort of a legend, very much important in the relations between the two countries. There was the story of mutual dependency. The Ethiopians, the head of the church, the Abuna, was an Egyptian sent from Cairo or Alexandria, in a country in which Christianity and politics were entwined. And of course, in Egypt, the fear that the source of their life, the Nile, may be blocked by those Ethiopians. So in a later book and in this conference, we all discussed the mutuality of those relations. Nobody imagined that starting from 2011, the Ethiopia would really start building the dam, which is about to be now materialized. So the history is there, and I think you quoted the right thing. There is something blurred. Ethiopians know very little about Egypt. The Egyptians are having Ethiopia as a sort of a threat, but this history is there, and now I'm not sure everyone is really aware of those 1,000 years of mutuality, but surely it is there on both sides. The Ethiopians consider the Blue Nile as the main source for future development. The Egyptians are having their fears about the Nile against the background of 1,000 years. I don't know how much it will affect real politics, but history is always there, at least in the back of the minds of people.
Let's go back into history and the centuries from the 13th, I think, to the 16th century is known as the golden era for Ethiopia. And also it's where stories of alleged control of Abai, or the Nile, also known as, that the Ethiopian emperors tried following the persecution and detention of their Coptics in Cairo. Now, well, different emperors, according to the book, I think written in one of the chapters by Professor Pankhurst, right? Different emperors like King Lalibela, Amdetzion, Emperor Dawit, maybe it's not in a chronological order. And also it was Ethiopian emperors enjoyed, it's a time of the emperors that enjoyed the paid tributes from the Mamluks in Egypt, and also the free passing through Cairo without paying tax. When did it start, this story of alleged control of the Abyei River? When did it start, and was Ethiopia capable of doing it? And did it ever stopped? Because I think it was Lakuto, if I'm not mistaken, that stopped it by a prayer for some 3 years, and then it started to flow again. So tell me, take us into that story.
Well, it's really the time of the Solomonians, 1270 to 1529.
Exactly.
Let's bother with dates. Occurred at the same time that Egypt, as a political entity, reached also its climax, the time of the Mamelukes, 1250 to 1517. Both countries as political entities were at their peak. And of course, this mutuality of the Ethiopians need the head of the church from Egypt. And the Egyptians are very much aware of the Nile because the Mamluks developed Egypt and were afraid of the myth. The myth, by the way, the first time that I found documents about the myth goes back to the 11th century, 400 years earlier. There was an ebb in the flow of the Nile in Egypt, and I think it was the time of the Fatimid that they sent the Coptic archbishop to Ethiopia to see what happens there. And maybe the Copts in Egypt were telling the Egyptians, we have a leverage on those Christian Ethiopians, they are dependent on us. So it was there, the myth. But during the time of the Mamluks and the Solomonian, it reached its peak. The Mamluks considered themselves the champions of Islam also in the Horn of Africa, and they threatened Ethiopia not to send the bishop if they maltreat the Muslims in Ethiopia. And the Ethiopians responded by threatening to block the Nile. It comes to my mind the most, I would say, striking episode. In the year 1443, Emperor Zar Yaqub sent a letter to the Mamluk Sultan Azair Jakmak. If you read it today, it gives you the chill, because he said, don't you know that I control the Nile, and if I want, I can starve and your people, and you will all die if I interfere with the Nile. So a day later on, they reach an agreement and so on, but the idea was that the source of Egyptian life is in Ethiopia. And the Ethiopians maybe one day will interfere with the Nile is a myth. By the way, all scholars agree that in 15th century, 16th century technology, there was no possibility of blocking the Nile or building a big dam like of today. On the other way around, the same was the Egyptians. They were thinking at the time, I'm now dealing it from another aspect, of digging a canal in the Suez. It could be done only in the later part of the 19th century with modern French technology. In the 15th, 16th century, they couldn't dig a canal like today, and also the Ethiopians could not build what is today the Renaissance Dam. But the political mutuality and the story behind it is very much relevant to today as a background.
But there, just to add up on this one for clarity, there was this, I think, a Portuguese, but at that time, a governor of India, and also from the book I got, and he was actually committed to do to divert Nile, and he made this like kind of blueprint how to do it. And he also got or sent out for skilled architects who can do it. It only didn't happen because he was called for another duty.
Well, I don't know. I think, thank God I'm not an engineer, but as far as I know, 16th century technology was not up to the task of building what is being built today. But this gentleman, Albuquerque, was a Portuguese viceroy in India. And the background was that the Portuguese discovered the sea route to India, and the Ottomans, and earlier the Mamluks, they competed with them on the sea route to India. And there was a naval war in which the Portuguese gained the upper end because they had the ocean-going ships. But as a sideshow to this colossal war between the Portuguese and the Ottomans, which determined European superiority over Islam in reaching India, it's of major importance to global history. Who controlled the maritime commerce? Europe did as a result of this war. But as a sideshow, the Portuguese also landed in Massawa. Christopher de Gama, son of the great Vasco da Gama, and helped the Solomonians, Emperor Galadeus, release Ethiopia from Ahmad Gran, the Muslim from Harar, whom the Ottomans helped. So as a sideshow to the big Christian Islamic war on the route to India, there was also a sideshow of Islamic Christian war, Portuguese sideshow in Ethiopia. And part of it was the idea that we can defeat Islam by blocking the Nile. And from there you quote this idea of sending engineers from Portugal to divert the Nile. Nothing came out of it. It's only allowed the myth to spread about the ability to damage Egypt and Islam, but nothing came out of it, and possibly they couldn't do.
Am I right if I say that from the whole literature that I got, Ethiopia wasn't really willing? I think they used it against Egypt just for that, to make them fear if they do something, to the Coptics and Christians there. Was it really a serious will? I didn't get that from the literature.
Yes. They first of all, for the sake of humanity and justice, Egypt also helped Ethiopia, sending scholars and architects and political advisors to Ethiopia. The Ethiopians also had good relations with Egypt and were allowed to go on pilgrimage to Jerusalem and so on. It was not all the time enmity, but in the sense of enmity, there was this mutual threat. On the Ethiopian side, it was we can block the Nile. They could not, but as a threat, it was effective at the time. In contrast to what is today, I think that the old concept and now the reality of the Great Ethiopian Dam is of mutual benefit to all. But against the background of threat and fear, it's not always understood as such.
True. Besides the Ethiopians, besides the two, I mean, the Ethiopia and Egypt, or the emperors and the sultanates, Europeans also have attempted to control the river Nile. And as you clearly pointed out, actually up until now, no single political force has been able to control the entire basin. The British attempted, like I think 3 times, come up, I think, with a report or what we call it, like a proposal how to do it. And Europeans obviously couldn't do it because they couldn't colonize Ethiopia, where the source of the water is found. Now, I'm trying to relate. If the British were not successful, so how come by that time, when in the 1915s and before that in the 1929, they gave this historic right to Egypt to control much of the flow?
Well, you open the flow now to many issues. First of all, after the Portuguese were there and they won the competition on the route to India around Africa, they deserted the Red Sea and Ethiopia. Europeans were back in the 18th century explorers like James Bruce, who discovered the source, of Ethiopians knew it, of the Blue Nile. We're talking mid 18th century. And in Europe, there was this idea they called the Prester John legend, that there is an Ethiopian king over there who can help us, stemming from the days of the Crusade, defeat the Muslims also by blocking the Nile. The myth was there. Now, the British, once they control Egypt as of 1882, and then Sudan as of 1898, they control the Nile Basin. They did not control Ethiopia. Mm-hmm. And they knew and understood that the source of the Nile for the whole basin is Ethiopia's, the Kur Abai, the Blue Nile, the Lake Tana. And as from 1902, they asked the first Menelik, then later Rastafari, the future Haile Selassie, permission to build a dam in Lake Tana. They thought that the water tower of the Nile Basin, Sudan and Egypt under their control, the great producer of cotton for the empire, the biggest in the world, should be in Lake Tana, a dam in Lake Tana. And the idea from 1902, by my studies from 1902 until 1955, they continued begging the Ethiopians, let us build a dam in Lake Tana. But the Ethiopians had their reason to suspect that once the British would be in, mm-hmm. they would never leave. Mm-hmm. So it's a very complicated story. And who knows if the British could have built a dam in Lake Tana, no Mussolini would ever imagine on conquering Ethiopia and so on and so forth, and maybe the industrialization of the country would have started earlier. We cannot speculate about things that never happened. The fact of history was that the Ethiopians would not let the British from Sudan build a dam in Lake Tana. Instead, Haile Selassie, quite wisely, he invited Americans to survey mm-hmm. the possibility of a dam in the Blue Nile. And the Americans came forward. They made the survey, big one, many years. I think in 1964, they produced 17, if I'm not mistaken, volumes on what to do and where to do concerning the Blue Nile. They were on the shelf of the emperor, later on the shelf of Meles Zenawi, I was told, and they were advising building a dam where the Great Renaissance Dam is now being built. Not in Lake Tana, but down the stream, closer to the Sudanese border. Yeah. And I was told by a close advisor of Meles, the late Meles, that he was reading those volumes time and again every night secretly. Mm. And then he came with the idea and then the plan to build the Renaissance Dam. At the time, they called it the Millennium Dam, that it will be ready for the year 2000 Ethiopian calendar. Yeah. But the whole story of the British idea, the British understood very well that Aswan in Egypt, this is the wrong place to build the major dam. Because there you have humidity, you have evaporation, 15% of the water in Lake Nasser evaporated annually, and the right place is to do the great Nile Dam in Ethiopia. They understood it, and as from 1902, they envisioned a dam in Ethiopia, which is now being built.
You really give this emphasis for anyone who wants to examine the current affairs related to the relation between Ethiopia and Egypt, or Abai, the Abai River or Nile, that one should look at it from, again, the historical and the cultural perspectives. But however, both countries have come so far, like from Nasserism to Sadat, Mubarak, Morsi, and now we have LCC. And of course, as you mentioned, the self-definition actually revolves around the three. There is either religion-centered, or the nationalists, or it's Arab revolutionary. And when it comes to Ethiopia, from the monarchical time to communism, and then now I think pluralists we have. Ethiopia has restored relation with Egypt, meaning a dialogue between Meles Zenawi and Mubarak, I think, in 1993. And also Ethiopia has opened its door since 1991, having a foreign policy with the Middle Eastern countries. From Egypt's side also, as you say, after the drought, Egypt can no longer ignore Ethiopia. So it has started to see as a friendly country. But now, did the relation between the two fundamentally change it? I'm questioning this because I doubt, considering again, all we do is, even this discussion is to give that historical background or perspective and how to relate it to what's happening now, and how did it affect it, and how can it help it. So did it change fundamentally their relation? Do you believe so?
Well, I doubt if the objective wisdom of a scholar who looks at things and try to record and analyze past events, if it is that useful. But I think the other way is just to remain ignorant of yourself and of the other, which is a very bad prescription for building the future. What I did as an historian was to try to reconstruct the complicated story of the relations of those two civilizations sharing the same great river. And I can tell you that I had a chance to talk to Meles Zenawi. He would not tell me what he was doing and so on. I had a book published in 2002 called The Cross and the River, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the Nile.
Yeah.
And Meles knew it by heart. When I met him a few years later, he told me, he asked Mubarak to read it. So the Egyptian ambassador in Israel called me if I can give him a copy for the president.
Wow.
If he read it or not, I don't know. But Mubarak also had a copy of The Cross and the River, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the Nile. How much people like Hosni Mubarak or Meles Zenawi were influenced by history, I cannot tell. But surely it is there, especially useful in trying to understand each other. For the Ethiopians, what I offered is to understand the Egyptian side. By the way, 2 years ago, I was in Cairo and I gave a public lecture on the same thing, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the Nile. For an Israeli, it's very delicate matter because Israel should, Ethiopians and Egyptians, they know diplomacy better than the Israelis, and we are always, the Israelis, suspected of cooking something.
Okay.
Well, I'm not. I'm not in the business of advising or politics or intelligence. I'm in the business of dealing with the past, like along the lines that we are conducting now. So I'm still amazed how little Egyptians are aware of the concerns of Ethiopians, and how little Ethiopians are aware of the concerns of the Egyptians. So what I may boast at doing in the past was trying to inform each party of the concerns and the fears of the other. I don't follow the negotiations of today. When it will be history, I may be going back to that, but as long as it is, Americans call it, don't try to paint a moving train. An historian should avoid running after the events. When it's history, I will find interest in reconstructing it.
Mm.
But I think it is up to the two parties to learn more on the other. I can tell you that the Egyptians are very, very, very much worried and concerned about the very idea. We were talking about 1,000 years of myth. Suddenly it is a reality.
Mm-hmm.
The source of their life is in the hands of those Ethiopians over there. The Ethiopians, the Egyptians are really worried and concerned. It's like the whole world turned upside down for them. They also consider the Nile, the river of Egypt. Now the source of the Nile is in Africa and in the hands of the Ethiopians. So I think the best thing that historians and history can give us is a window to the soul of the other. And in this story of the Nile, especially today, I think that now in Ethiopia there is being built the right dam in the right place. The British thought it before, then the Americans, then, but we have to understand the concern of the Egyptians. Now, I was telling, I'm not in the business of hydropolitics, but I read studies by my fellow geographers that the Egyptians should be thankful for the Ethiopians for building the right place, the right dam in the right place, because in future, the White Nile, stemming from the Great Lakes of Africa, is drying up.
Mm.
Because the monsoon rains shifted here and there. The future of water is on the Ethiopian plateau. And there would be a water tower for everyone. So I was telling the Egyptians, at least there will be water to quarrel about.
Hmm.
So in many ways, it is the win-win situation for everyone. But there is much of psychology in the background. In every historical juncture, you have it. Common sense and reality are just part of the picture.
Two things I want to quickly point out, because I remember when you say the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is at the right time, at the right place. And then there was a place in the book, in your book, where you say that the Aswan High Dam was actually in a wrong place, and it was that the Egyptians are paying a price now for their anxieties. Can you explain that?
Well, when the British conquered Egypt and then the Sudan, and they were taking care of the whole Nile basin, the Nile Valley, not the heights of the Nile, which is Ethiopia, the Nile Valley, Sudan and Egypt, they built in Aswan a small dam that will take care of the annual irrigation in Egypt, no more. And the people came with the idea of building the high dam of Aswan. And the British said, no, 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 this is the wrong place. We have to do it in Tana, in Ethiopia. Only in 1952, when the young officers in Egypt, Nasser, Sadat and his friends came to power, they, in a few weeks, they embraced the plan to build a high dam there. Now, for them, the idea was to have the sources of the Nile in our land, in Aswan. There will be a big lake, like it is today, Lake Nasser, and it will be controlled by us. So those Africans over there would have no leverage on us. And they really turned into the Arab world, yeah. Pan-Arabism and unity and so on, and not to the old Egyptian nationalist slogan of unity of the Nile Valley, Egypt oriented on Sudan and the river. For to them to build the Aswan Dam was part of the political revolution. In spite of the advice by experts, water experts, not to build it over there. And it's surely the wrong dam in the wrong place, as I said before. 15% of the water just evaporated. This is not the place, it's one of the hottest places, and the surface of the lake is such that they lose water. But the Egyptians were sort of like satisfied. Okay, we have the Nile with us. There was this agreement, so to speak, that the British had with between Egypt and Sudan, both controlled by them in 1929, and then in 1959, that Egypt and the Sudan share between them all the waters, ignoring Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
This is in the days of British colonialism. They were angry at the Ethiopians for not cooperating on the Tana Dam, and they sort of agreed. It was the British colonial machinations that these agreements would
Why
not
they are
happen.
angry then?
The British were angry at the Ethiopians for not allowing
them to do it in there. Okay.
Build the dam where it should be.
Okay.
Officers took but still they resisted the idea of building the high dam in Aswan. It was the Egyptian revolutionaries of Nasser. They were signing a treaty with the British, by which the British evacuated Egypt in 3 years, and they started building the Aswan Dam. It was a political dam rather than a hydrological one. But now the right dam in the right places for all riparian civilizations is being built.
Africa.
Let's go back to the European perspective. Back in the days, in the early 17th century, as you tried to mention before, there's this priest John of the East in Ethiopia was favored by the Europeans, mainly because that they assumed he can do this, what we call it in this day, proxy war for them in pushing the Western Christendom to the East. And to fight with the sultanates in Egypt. Now, last week I read this from the official website of European Union that they say the European Union is not engaged, but is participating as an observer in the negotiation, which is now convened by the African Union, because they say all three countries are strategically important for them: Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan. Also, I don't remember the time, but in their article they talk about, I didn't come across in your book, perhaps, I don't know. Nobody's talking about the underground water Egypt had, the alternative and desalination. But I saw in this article that the European Union talk about. Now, I assume that European interests in these three countries, or even on the river, might not be the same like before, like the 4 centuries before. But how do you think the European Union involvement, even as a status observer, or what they do with their bilateral relation, or in the international community, can impact to strike a deal, to reach an agreement between the tripartite countries? I know that you say you're not following what's happening now, but just, even from the historical perspective, if you can comment on that.
Well, Europe now has a little say in Africa, Asia, and so on. The good old days of colonialism, so to speak, are much over. Even the Americans, the dialogue between the Ethiopians and the Egyptians moved to Washington for a while until a few months ago.
Yeah.
And even the pressure that America can apply on the parties did not work. It's up to the parties, and with good reason. Foreigners should not force anything. They cannot force everything. Egyptians and Ethiopian civilization of 1,000 years, they know or should know better what is good for them, and no one can and should change it. But I can tell you 2 things related to that. One is that we are talking about Egypt, Ethiopia, Sudan, and other riparian countries. They are not that much dependent on the story. About 250 million people.
Yeah.
Expectations are that in a generation and something ahead, there will be 500 million people. Ethiopians, Egyptians, Sudanese, and others.
Yeah.
Mother Nature is not that much considerate. Waters in the river would remain the same if today's leadership would not take care of the future. It will be a major, major disaster if the 2 parties are not taking care of what is being now done. As an observer, for me from the outside, to see is that the real water tower, where there will be more water, less evaporation, even electricity as a byproduct of all that, is being built. So the 2 sides should understand that. Let me tell you from what I see against the history that I studied.
Mm-hmm.
The very idea of the dam in Ethiopia came as a surprise to Egypt. They thought that they own the Nile, they have the Aswan Eye Dam, and the Nile is theirs from biblical days. Suddenly, the concept that the Nile and the water will be controlled by Ethiopians is a major, major, major surprise for them, even though they could have known from before or what have you. So what I observed now as an outsider, following the Egyptian response, it's like mourning over a departed someone. You know, psychologists say there are a few stages.
Mm-hmm.
One is a state of shock. The other is a state of confusion. Then comes exception, and then comes, I don't know. What I sense now that 9 years after the 2011 surprise that the Ethiopians are building the dam, that the Egyptians are now in stage 3. That they accept the fact that the dam is there.
Mm-hmm.
Until a few years ago, they would not accept the very fact.
Yeah.
There were all sorts of ideas about military intervention and what have you. But now the good word is that the Egyptians do accept the fact that it is there. Now, there is an argument. You can understand this side or that side about the technicalities, about how quickly should the Renaissance lake would be filled, what would be the policy once there is a drought in the area, and so on and so on. Now there is a big argument about the details where we are in the stage of acceptance. For me, against the 1,000 years of history of all that, I think it's good news for the two sides to accept the new fact that the great Ethiopian Renaissance dam is there. And people, I believe, begin to realize that it is indeed for the benefit of all the children of the river, Ethiopians, Sudanese, Egyptians.
Mm.
Let me tell you another thing about Europe, America, in that respect, also Israel. I'm not a politician, I'm speaking as a private person. They are all for the welfare and the success and the stability of Ethiopia and of Egypt. Every person of goodwill all over the globe should understand that there should be cooperation between them. They should preserve the resource of water, and the stability of Egypt is a major interest of the Western world, also of Israel. And the stability of Ethiopia is a major interest of the globe, and the two sides, God willing, will help each other.
But about the underground water or the aquifer, what about that? Why is nobody, Egypt, okay, for obvious reason, is not talking any option. It's like Nile is their only option. But up there in the north, Libya is using the same underground water. Why no one in the international community is encouraging Egypt to use another alternative? If it really, which it doesn't, but the Great Renaissance Dam of Ethiopia will affect the amount of flow of water. I mean, it's a reality. It's not going anywhere after this dam will be used, and even Ethiopia have a right to develop itself using its water. So why is not, my interest is, why is no one talking about that? Whereas we know there are research and articles written about it.
Well, in the field of water engineering, I'm just a pedestrian. I don't understand in that. As an historian, also of Egypt, I don't think there is any substitute to the waters of the Nile. Desalination factories and so on. The dependency on the waters of the Nile is total. Egyptian agriculture, modernized as of the early 19th century, is based on wasting water, flooding the fields, and having the crops based on that. It's not the best system. So they should modernize on that. But all those ideas and so on, they are auxiliary ones. It's helpful, but the main issue would remain. Egypt needs 55.5 billion cubic water annually, like allotted in the 1955-59.
While reading your book and this book, The Cross and the River, the very much running theme throughout, I can say almost the whole chapters, all chapters, is that you emphasize that the self-definition of Ethiopia and Egypt is the base really for them to conceptualize their significant other, as you call it, or each other. Now, Ethiopia has definitely come so far with its ever-evolving self-definition, from Christian to liberal state, from one-dimensional to pluralist. And also, in addition, the current negotiation or disputes has witnessed the united front of Ethiopians, regardless of differences, ethnic, religious, or even political view differences. We have seen all Ethiopian united and vanguarding Ethiopia's right on the river of Abai and its right to develop itself. This indeed, I believe, narrowed Egypt's intervention in the inside affair of Ethiopia. Perhaps maybe not completely, but it has definitely contributed. For me, in fact, one of the milestones in this ongoing thing and how Ethiopia are uniting in defending, the propaganda, the negative propaganda that comes from Egypt, is that it demonstrated especially the Ethiopian Muslim community serving and defending their countries through using the language Arabic, because mostly what comes from Egypt is in Arabic language, and which indeed covered a big void from Ethiopia side. And also, I believe it answers one of your questions in the book somewhere, which you forwarded as a question, to be answered through time, that in their relation between Ethiopia and Egypt, that you hoped the Muslim community in Ethiopia might bridge that gap with Ethiopia's relation with the Middle East. Now, without denying the achievement made so far, still they are far from having a deal. Given all this, do you think this conceptualization of Ethiopia and Egypt of each other, did it advance in terms of creating a mutual relevance? How will this help to strike a deal? And if no deal, what is the alternative? You call it the frightening one.
Well, first of all, I'm glad that the Blue Nile is now uniting Ethiopians. In the past, Ethiopians considered the Blue Nile as a barrier, that it was very difficult to cross. In the rainy season, you couldn't even cross it. And instead of the Nile in Egypt that was connecting the civilization in the Abai, the Blue Nile in Ethiopian history was a sort of divisive. Menelik built the first bridge for pedestrians, 1905, I believe. And then Haile Selassie in 1960 for vehicles. But other than that, the Blue Nile stole the waters away and divided the people instead of uniting them. So now when Ethiopians are united about the idea of having water and electricity and marching forward, so this is the gift of the Nile to Ethiopia. In that case is unity. Ethiopians are having their minds and their divisions all over, but the fact that the Nile unites them, it's a blessed one. What was the?
Do you see, did it advance in terms of, Ethiopia and Egypt conceptualizing how they conceptualize each other based on their self-definition inside? Did it advance, meaning for good reason? Or is it the same?
Well, the need to know more about the other. That it's not just a myth blurring the reality like it was in the past. Ethiopians were so threatening Egypt. The Egyptians were considering the Ethiopians something vague in the background. Now, even though there is no border, the two countries are really close together in terms of mutual interests and mutual problems, and I think they continue to be very much relevant to each other in the future. So understanding the other, this is the key. Ethiopia, as you mentioned, underwent transformations during my time as an observer, from Ayele Selassie to Mengistu to Meles, and today reality, fundamental changes, but the common reality of the need to make progress is there. Egypt underwent from the royal parliamentarian system of King Farouk in those days to the pan-Arabism of Nasser to Sadat, Mubarak, and then Morsi, and now Sisi. Major changes in the self concept on the parts of the Ethiopians and on the parts of the Egyptians, but the need to understand the other is always there. I follow the Egyptian misconception of what is Ethiopia, and Ethiopian also misconception of what is Egypt. This should be better addressed in the future. Still this idea of a myth, of a threat, of a mutual distrust is still there. For me as an outsider, it's easy to say, but this is the way to go forward, to understand that there is a common interest in facing Mother Nature and facing the need to share water. The scarcity of water is there threatening the future. Not that Egypt should threat Ethiopia, and Ethiopia should threat Egypt. The common need for understanding and cooperation is stronger than ever before now.
Let's go back to Israel. I have this question. Sadat, after the 6 Days War, I think 1971 or 72, he made a trip to Israel, and specifically in Haifa. He made this speech where he offered them actually to bring, as he said, the sweet Nile water to Israel. One, is Israel using water from Nile as we speak? Two, where does Israel stand behind the Ethio-Egyptian relation in geopolitics?
Well, first of all, Israel now produces more water than it needs. Desalination, Israel is a leading factor in the world in desalination. And the whole idea of bringing waters from Egypt to Israel is, Sadat was a great visionary, and sometimes he let his imagination, thank God, he envisioned the peace between Egypt and Israel. He was also a good friend of Haile Selassie in his time. But the whole idea, he just by way of being drifted away by his rhetoric, he said so. It's unrealistic to think of using the Nile water in Israel. Enemies of the peace used it to smear Israel and Egypt, in Ethiopia and elsewhere. It's just one of those irrelevant concepts.
Where does Israel stand now behind this, negotiation? I mean, no one might say publicly, I ally with this, or I mean, what is Israel's interest, if there is one?
Israel interests, I can combine it into two things which are one. Egyptian stability and prosperity. The fact that there is a peace between Egypt and Israel, from Israeli point of view, all over the history from the beginning of Zionism, that was Egypt is the core of the Arab world, and the peace with Egypt and of Egypt is a main interest of Israel. The same goes true to Israel and Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a major ally, was a major ally, and today is also a major ally of Israel. And more so, Ethiopians and Ethiopianness is part of now of Israeli society. There are 150,000 Ethiopians, the Beta Israel community. They are very, very noticeable part of Israel. You cannot ignore Ethiopia being an Israeli. It's now part of Israeliness is having this Ethiopian dimension. And thank God the interest is the same, that Ethiopia and Egypt would reach understanding, build stability, and prosper. This is an interest of Israel materialistically, from security point of view, and also spiritually and matter of identity. Ethiopia is now part of Israel, unbelievably so. Not without problems. The absorption of the Beta Israel in Israel is also not an easy task, even though, if I may add, the Ethiopian third generation, second generation, young women, through education, they make it forward unbelievably. You girls are having an advantage, knowing how to accept changes and learn and go forward. We men, we are more limited. Sometimes we are stuck in the past with our pride, but you having the advantage. By the way, not only Ethiopians in Israel, all over, including the Islamic world, girls do study. Today, I studied it in another education, higher education in the Arab world. Today, half of the studentship are girls, and also the graduates in the Arab world. So it's, if you look for a ray of hope, look in the mirror. In Ethiopia, of course.
Thank you. As a woman, I take that credit, so I should say thank you. One of, in today's negotiations, ongoing negotiation between the tripartite country, is one of the problem is the amount of filling of the Great Renaissance Dam due to drought. Now, as you know, drought means like it's a natural phenomena and no one has a control over it, and unpredictable sometimes. Is it mandatory, to negotiate on this matter at all? What are the pros and cons if it can be dealt? Can it be dealt in the future when it happens? Just from your experience, and what can Ethiopia do really to convince the international community that even after having built the dam, the water will continue to flow to the downstream countries? Why is it so hard to get that?
Ethiopia should convince the Egyptians, not the international community. The international community is having all sorts of other problems to bother about. But the Egyptians
Egypt seems to go all over, with that agenda. So maybe if it make an impact.
Well, I can tell you, going back to history, and quite a recent one, in 1987, not many years ago, after 4 or 5 years of drought in Ethiopia, the Nile in Egypt was on the verge of drying up. Egyptians were hysterical about it. They said in 2 more dry years in Ethiopia, the Nile will virtually disappear in Egypt. This was not many years ago. So the idea that the good old Nile will not flow, and the source of it is in Ethiopia, drought or what have you, on the mind of the Egyptians is there. I think that, as we said before, it's good for Egypt. There will be enough water to quarrel about. There will be enough water for the Ethiopians to appease the Egyptians, to ensure the Egyptians that water would be there to share. The fact is that Ethiopia needs more electricity than water on regular years, and I think there is room for mutual understanding on that. But as I said before, the burden of history and psychology and mutual fears and mutual suspicion is there to overcome.
Can you tell us quickly, when did your love with Ethiopia started? If I may call it love, I mean, definitely spent much years in it.
Yeah, I'm an historian, supposed to be professional and not be romantic about things. I think that first of all, when I finished my MA studies at the Hebrew University, prior to that BA at Tel Aviv University, Tel Aviv opened an African history department section, and I offered me to finance my studies in London, the School of Oriental and African Studies, if I switched to Africa. So I started getting interest in Ethiopia, and of course, in no time, I was fascinated by the culture, by the history, and mostly because of the ability to maintain independence and pride. Unfortunately, my PhD was on Ras Alula, perhaps the embodiment of victorious Ethiopia, its ability to stand up to West European imperialism and to Islamic empires on all sides, and retain independence. My wife later on explained to me that I can befriend only independent-minded colleagues and friends. So maybe I was attracted to the almost uniqueness of Ethiopian ability to retain independence all throughout history. It's a unique case. I was repeating time and again this idea and studying it. But I try to remain objective and true to my profession, not to be an advocate of anything. There are enough lawyers for issues. I try to understand the complicated past, Ethiopian history, the nice parts of it and the less nice parts of it. I'm trying to be as objective as I can, even though you're right, I love Ethiopia.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Professor Haggai, for your time again. And I really hope we will meet again in the same topic, because this is really not ending.
I published a book on Haile Selassie.
Okay.
Okay, it came out 2 years ago. Haile Selassie, his rise, his fall.
Okay.
So I began my studies with Ras Alula, and recently I did my study, long study on Ayele Selassie, a very, very, very dramatic story of the more important Ethiopian in the 20th century. So if you like, next time to talk about on Amazon, but
all right. Okay. Okay. No, it's good to know. Really, thank you very much. And maybe I will also try to organize next time live, like a webinar where everybody can question. We prepare the agenda, and I hope you will be available for that.
okay.
Okay. And thank you so much. It's really my pleasure. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mahlet. Bye-bye.